The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as champagne glasses clinked throughout the grand ballroom. It was the kind of evening where everything cost more than most people earned in a month. The annual charity gala at the Metropolitan Hall attracted the city's wealthiest residents, all dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, writing checks they'd never miss to causes they'd probably forget by morning. Alexander Westbrook stood at the center of the largest group, his perfectly styled dark hair and custom-fitted tuxedo making him look like he'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. At 35 years old, he was considered one of the finest concert pianists of his generation. His performances at Carnegie Hall and the Royal Albert Hall had earned standing ovations. His recordings had won awards. His ego had grown even larger than his talent. The problem with modern audiences, Alexander said loudly enough for half the room to hear, is that they can't distinguish between true artistry and mere competence. They clap for anything these days. The small crowd around him laughed on cue, though some exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was typical Alexander, always ready to remind everyone that he was better than them, better than everyone, really. He'd turned arrogance into a performance art of its own. "Oh, Alexander, you're too much," said one woman in a pearl necklace that probably cost more than a car. "I'm simply honest," he replied with a thin smile. "Excellence should be recognized and mediocrity should be called what it is." Across the ballroom, Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart quietly along the wall. At 42, she'd learned to be invisible at events like these. Her gray uniform marked her as staff, someone the guests looked past rather than at. She'd been working at the Metropolitan Hall for 7 years now, always on the evening shift, cleaning up after events when the beautiful people went home. She didn't mind the work. It was honest and it paid her bills. Her hands, rough and worn from years of labor, moved efficiently as she collected empty glasses and wiped down tables. The music playing softly in the background made her chest tighten like it always did, but she'd gotten good at ignoring that particular ache. Maria was heading toward the service entrance with a tray of champagne flutes when it happened. Someone bumped into her from behind and she stumbled forward, straight into Alexander's path. The glasses on her tray rattled dangerously but didn't fall. She caught her balance just in time, her heart racing. "I'm so sorry, sir," Maria said immediately, steadying the tray. "Are you all right? Did I get anything on your suit?" Alexander looked down at her with the expression someone might give a bug they'd found in their salad. "You need to watch where you're going," he said coldly. "Do you have any idea how much this tuxedo costs?" "Again, I'm very sorry," Maria repeated, keeping her voice calm and professional. "Someone pushed me from behind, but that's no excuse. I should have been more careful." "Yes, you should have." Alexander turned to his audience, seeing an opportunity for entertainment. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No attention to detail, no awareness of their surroundings. Is it any wonder that, Alexander, perhaps we should—" One of the men in the group started, but Alexander waved him off. "Look at those hands," Alexander continued, gesturing at Maria's work-worn fingers still gripping the tray. Rough, clumsy, the hands of someone who has never appreciated anything delicate or refined. "Tell me, do you even know what we're celebrating here tonight?" Maria felt heat rising to her face, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with rude people before. "It's a fundraiser for the youth arts program, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to—" "Youth arts," Alexander laughed. "And what would you know about art? Have you ever been to a symphony, an opera, or do you spend your evenings watching television and eating fast food?" The crowd around them had grown uncomfortable now. Several people looked away. One woman touched Alexander's arm gently, suggesting they move on, but he was enjoying himself too much to stop. "I appreciate music very much. Actually," Maria said quietly, her dark eyes meeting his for just a moment. "I understand the pressure of performance, you understand?" Alexander's voice dripped with mockery. "Oh, this is rich. Tell me, what instrument do you play? The radio? The stereo?" His audience laughed, though the sound was strained now. Maria felt something shift inside her, a door she'd kept locked for 20 years rattling on its hinges. She shouldn't engage. She should just apologize again and walk away. That's what she'd done 1,000 times before when people treated her as less than human. But then Alexander noticed her glancing past him, toward the magnificent grand piano sitting on the stage at the far end of the ballroom. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway that probably cost more than she'd earn in 10 years. "Wait, don't tell me," Alexander said, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. You play piano, is that it? You tickle the ivories at home after a long day of scrubbing toilets? I used to play, yes, Maria heard herself say. A long time ago. The laughter around them stopped. Something in her voice and the way she said those words made everyone pause. Alexander sensed weakness, an opportunity to really humiliate this woman who dared to bump into him, who dared to claim she understood art. Well then, he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet section of the ballroom. I have a proposal. A wager, if you will. Maria's stomach dropped. She knew she should walk away. She should apologize one more time and disappear into the service corridors where she belonged. But that door inside her was shaking harder now, and her heart was pounding in a way it hadn't for 2 decades. You go up to that piano, Alexander continued, gesturing grandly toward the stage. You play something, anything, and if you can manage even a simple piece without embarrassing yourself, I will apologize to you publicly right here. In front of everyone. He paused for effect, his smile widening. But when you fail, when you prove that you can't play, you'll admit in front of all these people that someone like you has no business pretending to understand art, that people of your station should leave culture to those who truly appreciate it. The gasps around them were audible now. Several people protested, calling Alexander's challenge cruel and unnecessary. But he held up his hand, his eyes locked on Maria. What do you say? He asked. Or would you rather just admit now that you're out of your depth? Maria stood frozen, the tray of glasses still in her hands. Every sensible part of her brain screamed at her to refuse, to walk away from this trap. She hadn't touched a piano in over 20 years. Her fingers were stiff from hard labor. The person she'd been was dead and buried. But then she thought of her younger self, the girl who'd lived and breathed music, who'd sacrificed everything. She thought of every person who'd ever looked through her like she was invisible, like her work made her worthless. She set the tray down on a nearby table. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. All right, Maria said. I accept. As Maria walked toward the stage, the crowd parted silently around her. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back, hear the whispered conversations starting up like rustling leaves. Most people assumed they were about to witness a humiliation. A few hoped they were wrong. Alexander followed behind her, that smug smile still plastered on his face, already composing the cruel words he'd use when she inevitably failed. But what none of them knew, what Maria herself had tried to forget for 20 years, was who she used to be. Her name back then was Maria Delgado Santos, not Maria Santos, the cleaning woman. Maria Delgado Santos, the child prodigy from Seville, Spain, the girl who could make a piano sing before she could properly read a book. She'd grown up in a small apartment above her father's music shop. Her mother taught violin at the local conservatory. Their home was always filled with music, with the sound of scales and sonatas drifting through the windows into the narrow street below. Maria couldn't remember a time when music wasn't part of her breathing, her heartbeat, her very existence. She was 4 years old when she first climbed onto the piano bench in her father's shop. Her feet couldn't reach the pedals. Her hands were tiny. But when she pressed the keys, something magical happened. The notes made sense to her in a way that words never quite did. She could hear a melody once and play it back perfectly. By the time she was 6, she was composing her own pieces. Her parents recognized her gift immediately, though they were careful not to push too hard. They'd seen too many talented children burned out by ambitious parents. But Maria didn't need pushing. She begged for lessons. She practiced for hours without being asked. The piano wasn't work for her. It was joy in its purest form. By age 12, she'd won her first international competition in Warsaw. The judges couldn't believe what they were hearing from such a young girl. It wasn't just technical skill, though that was remarkable enough. It was the emotion she brought to every piece, the way she seemed to understand the composer's heart and translate it through her fingers. At 15, she performed at the Palau de la Música in Barcelona. The concert hall, with its stunning stained glass and incredible acoustics, was packed. She played Chopin that night, and when she finished, the audience sat in stunned silence before erupting into applause that seemed to shake the building. 3 encores later, the director of the Royal Conservatory offered her a full scholarship on the spot. The newspapers called her the Angel of Seville. Music critics wrote that she was possibly the finest young pianist Europe had produced in decades. Her parents were so proud they cried. Her younger brother, Diego, only 10 years old then, would brag to his friends that his sister was going to be more famous than Beethoven. Everything was perfect. Everything was possible. The world was opening up before her like a beautiful song, and she was only 19 years old. Then came the phone call that destroyed everything. Her parents had been driving home from her brother's school concert. A rainy night, poor visibility. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the median. They died instantly, the police said, as if that was supposed to be comforting. Maria was in Vienna when it happened, preparing for a major performance. She flew home immediately, numb and shaking, unable to process that her mother and father were simply gone. The funeral was a blur. Diego clung to her, this small boy who'd lost everything, and she realized with crushing weight that she was all he had left. The debts came next. Her father's music shop had been struggling. There was a mortgage on the apartment. Medical bills from her mother's treatment for cancer 2 years earlier that they'd never quite finished paying. Suddenly, Maria wasn't just grieving. She was drowning. She tried to keep playing at first. She had commitments, contracts, a scholarship. But Diego needed her. He was having nightmares, failing in school, barely eating. He needed stability, needed a parent, and she was the only one left. The conservatory was understanding but firm. She either committed fully or she gave up her spot. She made her choice on a rainy Tuesday morning, sitting in the director's office with Diego's hand clutched in hers. She withdrew from the program. She canceled her upcoming performances. She told her agent to stop calling. The world of concert halls and standing ovations faded like a dream she couldn't quite remember. They moved to America a few months later. Maria had an aunt in New York who offered them a place to stay. A fresh start, her aunt said. A chance to rebuild. What her aunt didn't mention was that her spare room was barely big enough for one person, let alone two, and that Maria would need to find work immediately. She took the first job she could find, waitressing at a diner in Queens. Her English was rough, her hands unused to carrying heavy trays. The customers were often rude, the tips were small, and she came home every night with her feet aching and her heart hollowed out. She tried playing piano once at her aunt's apartment. There was an old upright in the living room, out of tune and missing keys. The moment her fingers touched it, she broke down sobbing so hard that Diego came running, terrified. After that, she couldn't bring herself to try again. The piano had been her connection to her parents, to her old life, to the person she used to be. Playing it without them felt like betraying their memory. Years passed. Diego got older. Maria worked multiple jobs, saving every penny for his education, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes, eventually landing the steadier position at the Metropolitan Hall. She watched her brother grow from a traumatized boy into a focused young man. He got into medical school, full scholarship. He was going to be a doctor. She'd sacrificed everything for that, and she didn't regret it. Not really. Diego was her family, her purpose, the reason she kept going. But sometimes, late at night, she'd hear music in her dreams and wake up with tears on her face, her fingers moving against the sheets as if searching for keys that weren't there. 20 years. 20 years since she'd played a real piano. 20 years since she'd been Maria Delgado Santos instead of Maria Santos. Her hands were different now, calloused and scarred from work. Her back hurt from years of bending and lifting. She was 42 years old, invisible in a gray cleaning uniform. And now she was climbing the steps to the stage, hundreds of wealthy strangers waiting to watch her fail, while Alexander Westbrook stood smirking behind her. She reached the grand piano and stood beside it for a moment. It was beautiful. A Steinway Model D, 9 feet of perfectly crafted instrument, the kind of piano she used to play in concert halls across Europe, the kind of piano she never thought she'd touch again. Maria's hands were shaking as she sat down on the bench. She adjusted it slightly, muscle memory taking over despite the years. She looked out at the crowd, at all those faces expecting nothing from her, and then at Alexander with his arms crossed and that insufferable smile. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under her rough skin. For a moment, everything else fell away. The ballroom, the people, the 20 years of pain and sacrifice and loss. There was only the piano. Only the music waiting inside it. Only the girl she used to be, reaching across time to remind the woman she'd become that some things, some essential parts of yourself, never truly die. They just wait, patient and quiet, for the moment when you're ready to set them free again. Maria took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes fell into the silence like drops of rain on still water. Maria's fingers moved across the keys, tentative at first, testing, remembering. The opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 began to fill the ballroom. It was one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano repertoire, the kind of composition that separated true masters from merely talented players, the kind of piece that could break your heart with its beauty if played right, or sound like a mechanical exercise if played wrong. For the first few seconds, her hands felt stiff, unfamiliar with the instrument after so many years. She could feel the roughness of her skin against the smooth ivory keys. Her fingers didn't quite remember where to go. Stumbling slightly over a transition, someone in the audience coughed nervously. Alexander's smile widened. This was going exactly as he'd expected, but then something shifted. Maria's eyes closed fully and she stopped thinking. She stopped worrying about the audience, about Alexander, about the 20 years that had passed. She let herself fall into the music the way she used to as a child, when playing piano wasn't about performance or competition or proving anything to anyone. It was simply about the conversation between her soul and the instrument. Her fingers found their rhythm, their memory. The years of cleaning and scrubbing hadn't stolen her gift. They'd only hidden it. Now it came roaring back like a river that had been dammed too long, finally breaking free. The music began to soar. The ballroom transformed. The notes cascaded through the space, rich and powerful, each one perfectly placed yet somehow spontaneous, alive. This wasn't just technical skill, though the technique was flawless. This was music that carried emotion in every phrase, pain and joy and longing woven together into something that made your chest ache just to hear it. In the audience, people stopped whispering. They stopped fidgeting. They stopped breathing. An elderly woman in the front row felt tears streaming down her face without knowing why. A businessman who'd come to the gala just to network found himself transported back to his childhood piano lessons, to the dreams he'd once had before life made him practical. A young couple held hands tighter, not looking at each other, both lost in the beauty of what they were hearing. And Alexander Westbrook felt his blood turn to ice. He knew this piece inside and out. He'd performed it dozens of times in concert halls around the world. He was considered one of the finest interpreters of Rachmaninoff alive today. But what he was hearing now was something beyond his reach, beyond his understanding. This wasn't just better than him. This was a completely different level of artistry. Maria's hands moved with impossible grace despite their rough appearance. The calluses and scars seemed to disappear, or maybe they became part of the music, adding texture and depth that only someone who'd suffered could bring. She played the thundering bass notes with her left hand, while her right hand danced through the delicate melody, both hands working in perfect harmony. The piece built and built, the tempo increasing, the dynamics swelling. Rachmaninoff had written this concerto during a period of deep depression, pouring all his despair and hope into the notes. Maria understood that. She'd lived it. Every measure she played carried the weight of her own losses, her own sacrifices, the years she'd spent scrubbing floors while her gift sat buried inside her like a seed waiting for light. She reached the cadenza, the solo section where the pianist is completely alone, no orchestra to hide behind. It's the moment where true mastery shows itself. Her fingers flew across the keys in cascading runs that should have been impossible for someone who hadn't practiced in decades. But muscle memory combined with pure emotion created something magical. A professional violinist in the audience recognized the interpretation style. It tickled something in his memory, something from years ago. He leaned over to his wife, whispering urgently. She shook her head in disbelief but pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she tried to search for something. Alexander couldn't move. His face had gone from smugly confident to pale and shocked. He recognized what he was hearing now. Not just skill, not just talent, but the mark of someone who had been trained by the absolute best, someone who had lived and breathed music at the highest international level. This wasn't a cleaning woman who'd taken a few piano lessons. This was a concert pianist, a real one, possibly better than he could ever hope to be. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd challenged someone completely out of his league, and he'd done it in the cruelest way possible, in front of hundreds of witnesses. His hands started to shake. His perfectly styled confidence began to crack. Maria played on, unaware of the chaos she was creating in the audience. She was lost in the music now, completely absorbed. The second movement began, softer and more introspective. This was the section that required the most emotional depth, where the notes had to sing like a human voice full of yearning and tenderness. She thought of her parents as she played, her father's laugh, her mother's gentle corrections during practice. She thought of Diego as a little boy, scared and alone after their deaths, trusting her to make everything okay. She thought of all the nights she'd come home exhausted, her hands aching, dreaming of the life she'd given up. All of it poured into the music, every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of beauty and loss. The piano became her voice, saying everything she'd kept locked inside for 20 years. People in the audience were openly crying now. Not polite dabbing at their eyes, but real tears streaming down faces. The music was breaking something open in everyone who heard it, reaching past their polite society masks to touch something raw and true. The elderly woman in the front row suddenly gasped. She grabbed her husband's arm. "My God," she whispered. "I know who this is. I heard her play in Barcelona years ago. That's Maria Delgado, the child prodigy from Spain." Everyone thought she was dead. The whisper spread like wildfire through the audience. People pulled out their phones, searching frantically. Maria Delgado Santos, competition winner, disappeared 20 years ago. There were old photos, grainy videos of a teenage girl playing in major concert halls. The resemblance was unmistakable, but Maria didn't hear any of this. She was deep in the third movement now, the triumphant finale. This was where the piece exploded with joy and power, where all the pain from the earlier movements resolved into something hopeful and strong. Her hands pounded the keys with controlled force, the music building to its massive conclusion. The technical demands were enormous. Her fingers had to move faster than seemed humanly possible, had to maintain perfect precision while conveying wild emotion. For anyone else, after 20 years away from the piano, this would have been impossible. But Maria wasn't anyone else. She'd been one of the greatest young pianists of her generation, and that gift hadn't left her. It had only been waiting. The final chords rang out through the ballroom, powerful and clear. Maria held the last note, letting it fade naturally into silence. She kept her hands on the keys, her eyes still closed, her whole body trembling from the exertion and emotion. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The moment stretched out, sacred and fragile. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause hit. It wasn't polite charity gala applause. This was the kind of ovation usually reserved for the greatest performers in the world's finest concert halls. People leaped to their feet, shouting, crying, clapping until their hands hurt. The sound was deafening. Maria opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. She looked out at the standing crowd, at the tears and the joy on their faces, and seemed genuinely confused. Behind her, Alexander Westbrook stood frozen, his face the color of old newspaper, his entire world crumbling around him. The cleaning woman he'd mocked, the simple person he'd decided to humiliate for his own amusement, was a legend he'd only read about in music history books, and everyone in the room now knew exactly what kind of man he really was. Maria stood up from the piano bench on shaking legs. The applause was still thundering through the ballroom, wave after wave of it crashing over her. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She wasn't dressed for this, wasn't prepared for this. She was wearing a cleaning uniform, for heaven's sake. And hundreds of people in evening gowns and tuxedos were giving her a standing ovation. She tried to step away from the piano, but her path was immediately blocked. The elderly woman from the front row had rushed onto the stage, tears streaming down her weathered face. She was elegant, probably in her 70s, wearing a navy dress that cost more than Maria made in 6 months. "It is you," the woman said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Maria Delgado, I saw you perform in Barcelona when you were just 16 years old. I was a music critic then, before I retired. Your performance of Chopin that night changed my life. I've never forgotten it, never. And then you just vanished and nobody knew what happened to you." Maria felt dizzy. Someone knew her. Someone remembered. After 20 years of being invisible, of being nobody, someone was looking at her and seeing the person she used to be. Yes, Maria managed to say. "That was me. A long time ago." More people were rushing toward the stage now. A man in his 60s, distinguished looking with silver hair, pushed through the crowd. He was crying too, not even trying to hide it. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he said simply. In 50 years of attending concerts all over the world, I have never heard anyone play Rachmaninoff like that. Never, someone else shouted from the crowd. I found her videos online. She won the Chopin competition at 16. Look, phones were out everywhere now. Screens glowing in the dim ballroom as people searched and shared. Old videos of a teenage Maria in formal concert dress, playing for audiences in Warsaw and Vienna and Barcelona. Photos of her with famous conductors. Articles in Spanish and German and French, all talking about the prodigy who disappeared without explanation. The host of the gala, Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, made her way onto the stage. She was a prominent philanthropist, known throughout the city for her arts advocacy and her no-nonsense approach to everything. She looked at Maria with a mixture of awe and something like fury at what had almost happened. "Ms. Delgado," she said, her voice carrying authority despite the chaos, "I think we all owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude for that extraordinary performance. And I believe someone else here owes you something as well." She turned to look at Alexander, who was still standing off to the side, frozen like a statue. All eyes in the ballroom turned to follow her gaze. Alexander Westbrook, the great concert pianist, the man who'd spent the entire evening reminding everyone how superior he was, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. His face was gray. His hands were trembling. He'd been recording the whole thing on his phone, planning to capture her failure for his own amusement. Instead, he'd recorded his own destruction, because it was already spreading. Someone had been live-streaming the event. The video of him mocking Maria, followed by her breathtaking performance, was already going viral. Thousands of views, tens of thousands, growing by the second. Comments flooding in from around the world. Who does this guy think he is? He bullied a legend and didn't even know it. The way she played after everything he said. "I'm crying." "This is what happens when you judge people by their appearance," Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Westbrook, you made a wager, as I recall. Ms. Delgado played not just a simple piece, but one of the most demanding compositions in the classical repertoire. I believe you promised an apology if she succeeded." Alexander opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked around at the sea of hostile faces, at the phone still recording, at Maria standing quietly on the stage in her gray uniform. There was no escape, no clever words that could save him now. He walked slowly onto the stage, each step looking like it cost him something. When he reached Maria, he couldn't meet her eyes. He started, then stopped. His carefully constructed arrogance had shattered, leaving behind just a man who'd made a terrible mistake in public. "I apologize," the words came out flat, insincere. The crowd murmured angrily. Mrs. Whitmore cleared her throat pointedly. Alexander swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was cruel. I was unforgivably cruel. I judged you based on your appearance, on your occupation, on everything except who you actually are. What you just played, I could practice for the rest of my life and never reach that level of artistry. I'm sorry, it wasn't a good apology. It was clumsy and forced and clearly motivated by fear of the consequences rather than genuine remorse. But it was something." Maria looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd tried to humiliate her for sport. "Music isn't about making other people feel small," she said quietly. "It's not about being better than anyone else. It's about truth. About beauty. About connecting with something deeper than ego." Her words hung in the air. Alexander flinched like she'd slapped him. "You have talent," Maria continued. "Real talent. But talent means nothing if you use it to build walls between yourself and other people. If you think it makes you superior. The greatest musicians I ever knew were humble. They understood that music was bigger than them, that they were servants to something sacred." She paused and her voice softened slightly. "I hope you learn that someday. I really do. Because life has a way of humbling all of us eventually, and it's better to learn that lesson by choice than by force." Then she turned and walked off the stage, leaving Alexander standing there alone, exposed and diminished in front of everyone who'd once admired him. But Maria's evening wasn't over. As she tried to make her way through the crowd, people surrounded her. Questions flew from every direction. "Why did you stop performing? Will you play again? Where have you been?" A well-dressed man introduced himself as the director of Lincoln Center. He pressed his business card into her hand. "We need to talk about getting you back on stage. The world needs to hear you play." Another woman, an agent, was already talking about recording contracts and tour opportunities. Someone else mentioned a documentary. The attention was overwhelming, suffocating after so many years of invisibility. Maria felt her phone buzzing in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands. Text messages were flooding in. Former teachers, old friends from the music world who'd somehow gotten her number. People she hadn't heard from in 20 years. But the message that made her breath catch was from Diego, her brother. He'd seen the video. That was you? Maria. Everyone at the hospital is watching this. I'm showing everyone. I'm so proud of you I can't even breathe. Mom and Dad would be so proud. Please call me. Tears blurred her vision. She'd given up everything for Diego so he could become a doctor, so he could have the life their parents wanted for him, and he'd succeeded. He'd made it. Maybe, just maybe, her sacrifice had been worth something after all. Mrs. Whitmore appeared beside her again, gently guiding her away from the crowd. You need a moment, she said kindly. Come with me. She led Maria to a quiet room off the main ballroom. That man is finished, Mrs. Whitmore said bluntly once they were alone. The video is everywhere. His reputation won't recover from this. But you're about to have choices you haven't had in a very long time. Whatever you decide to do next, do it for yourself, not for anyone else. Maria nodded slowly, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 30 minutes. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was racing. She'd broken open something inside herself that she'd kept locked away for 2 decades, and now she didn't know how to put it back. Outside, she could hear the crowd still buzzing with excitement, still talking about what they'd witnessed. Alexander had slipped away, his career in ruins. But Maria's story, her resurrection from obscurity, was just beginning to spread across the world. The cleaning woman who was really a legend, the simple worker who'd humbled an arrogant genius, the phoenix rising from 20 years of ashes. Her life was never going to be the same again. 3 weeks after the gala, Maria sat in her small apartment staring at 17 different offers spread across her kitchen table. Concert halls in Paris, Tokyo, and New York wanted her to perform. Record labels were offering contracts. The prestigious Manhattan Conservatory had offered her a full professorship with a salary that made her dizzy just thinking about it. The video had exploded beyond anything she could have imagined. 50 million views and counting. News outlets from around the world had tracked her down, wanting interviews. Her story had touched something in people. The cleaning woman who was secretly a genius. The sacrificial sister who gave up her dreams. The humble legend who'd shown kindness to the man who tried to humiliate her. Diego had taken emergency time off from his hospital residency and was staying with her now. He sat across from her, looking at all the papers with wonder and guilt written all over his face. You should do it, he said for the 10th time that morning. Maria, you should accept all of these. This is your dream coming back to life. I don't know what my dream is anymore, Maria said honestly. She picked up one of the concert hall offers and put it back down. That girl who wanted to perform at Carnegie Hall, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not her. But you could be, Diego insisted. His eyes were red. He'd been crying on and off since watching the video. I had no idea what you gave up for me. You never told me. All these years I thought you just moved on from music, that you found something else you wanted to do. I didn't know you were still carrying that dream around. Maria reached across the table and took his hand. I don't regret it. Not for a second. Look at you. You're saving lives, Diego. You're a doctor. That matters more than any concert ever could. But you matter too, he said, his voice breaking. Your happiness matters. Your music matters. You can't tell me that cleaning floors was what you wanted. She couldn't argue with that. The last 3 weeks had been strange. She'd taken time off from the Metropolitan Hall, needing space to think. But the truth was she'd been playing piano almost every day. Her aunt had gotten the old upright tuned, and Maria found herself drawn to it constantly. The muscle memory was coming back faster than she'd expected. The joy of playing, the thing she'd been afraid to feel, was flooding back into her life. But so were the complications. The attention was overwhelming. Strangers recognized her on the street. Her phone never stopped ringing. Everyone wanted a piece of her story, her time, her future. And then there was Alexander. She'd received a letter from him 2 weeks after the gala. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered by courier. She'd almost thrown it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of her. The letter was different from his public apology. longer, more honest. He wrote about his childhood, about a father who pushed him mercilessly, who told him that being the best was the only thing that mattered. He wrote about how he'd built his entire identity around being superior to others, and how watching her play had shattered that illusion completely. He didn't make excuses. He admitted he'd been cruel, that he'd hurt her for no reason other than his own insecurity. He wrote that he'd lost 3 major contracts since the video went viral, that his agent had dropped him, that he was being forced to face who he really was underneath all the arrogance. The letter ended simply, "Thank you for showing me that there's a difference between playing notes and making music. I'm sorry it took your grace to teach me what years of training never did." Maria had read that letter 5 times, trying to decide how she felt about it. There was a part of her that wanted to stay angry, to let him face the full consequences of his actions. But there was another part, the part that had been shaped by struggle and loss, that recognized genuine remorse when she saw it. Diego was watching her now, waiting for her to say something. Maria took a deep breath. "I'm going to accept the teaching position," she said finally. "At the conservatory." Diego looked surprised. "Not the concert tours? Not the recordings?" "No," Maria said, and as she said it, she felt certain for the first time in weeks. "Those offers are amazing and a part of me wants them. But I've been thinking about why that performance felt so powerful. It wasn't just because I can play technically well. It was because I've lived. I've suffered and sacrificed and learned things that can't be taught in a practice room." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. There are kids out there like I was, talented, passionate, but maybe they don't have the money or the connections or the family support. If I go back to performing, I help audiences for a few hours at a time. But if I teach, if I create a program for students who need it, maybe I can change some lives. Diego smiled, wiping his eyes. "That sounds like you. That sounds exactly like you." "And," Maria added, pulling out another paper from the stack, "I'm going to start a foundation. The money from a few select performances, managed carefully, could fund scholarships. Not just for the most talented students, but for the ones who need it most. The ones who might have to choose between their art and survival like I did." She'd already decided on the name. The Delgado Family Foundation for Young Musicians, in memory of her parents, funded by the gift they'd given her. Diego came over and hugged her tightly. "They would be so proud of you. You know that, right, Mom and Dad? They're probably watching all this and just bursting with pride." Maria let herself cry then. Really cry. For the first time since the gala. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when something broken inside you finally starts to heal. Over the next few months, Maria's new life took shape. The conservatory welcomed her with open arms. Her first class of students was small, just 12 young pianists from diverse backgrounds. Some were scholarship students she'd personally selected. Some had incredible talent but rough technique. All of them had something Maria recognized, that hunger to make music that went beyond just playing notes correctly. She was a different kind of teacher than she'd had. Demanding, yes, but kind. Focused on technique, but never forgetting that music was supposed to move people, not just impress them. Her students loved her. They worked harder for her than they'd worked for anyone, because they could see she believed in them. The foundation launched with a benefit concert. Maria performed her first real concert in 20 years. She played the same Rachmaninoff piece from the gala, and once again the audience stood and cried. But this time she was ready for it. This time she knew who she was and what she was doing it for. Diego was there in the front row, having paid an enormous amount for his ticket just to support the cause. He brought colleagues from the hospital. Watching his sister on stage, seeing her finally back where she belonged, was one of the best moments of his life. Alexander came too, though he sat in the back. He'd written to ask if his attendance would be unwelcome. Maria had written back saying everyone was welcome at a charity event. His career hadn't recovered and probably never would, not to its former heights. But he was teaching now too at a small community music school. His students there said he was patient and encouraging, nothing like his old reputation suggested. Before the concert, he'd approached Maria during rehearsal, nervous and humble. "I wanted you to know," he said quietly, "that I'm trying to do better. To be better. What you said that night about music being bigger than ego, I think about that every day now." Maria had simply nodded. "Good. Keep thinking about it." He'd asked if they could ever be friends. She'd been honest. I don't know. Maybe someday. But I appreciate that you're growing from this. That's what matters. As Maria's first year at the conservatory ended, 3 of her students won regional competitions. 5 received full scholarships to continue their education, and 1, a shy 15-year-old girl from the Bronx who reminded Maria of herself, performed a piece she'd composed herself. It was beautiful and raw and full of promise. Maria stood in the auditorium after that performance, watching families celebrate with their talented children, and felt a completeness she hadn't known was possible. She'd lost her dream once, sacrificed it for love, but life had given it back to her in a different form, deeper and richer than before. She wasn't the angel of Seville anymore, the prodigy who played for applause. She was Maria Delgado Santos, professor, mentor, and founder of a program that would help hundreds of young musicians avoid the choice she'd had to make. That night, she called Diego. "Remember when you asked if I regretted giving up music for you?" "Yeah," he said, "I've been thinking about it, and I realized something. I didn't give up music. I just learned what it was really for. Not for making myself famous, not for proving I'm better than anyone, but for lifting other people up, for creating beauty in a world that needs it, for passing something precious to the next generation." She could hear Diego crying on the other end of the line. "I love you," he managed to say. "I love you too," Maria said. "And I wouldn't change a single thing." She meant it. Every sacrifice, every hard year, every moment of loss had led her here. To a life that mattered, to music that healed instead of divided, to the understanding that true greatness isn't about standing above others, but about reaching down and pulling them up beside you. The simple cleaning woman had taught the world a lesson that night at the gala. But the greatest lesson, the one that changed everything, was the one she'd taught herself. That your worth isn't defined by your job title or your bank account or how many people know your name. It's defined by how you treat people when no one's watching, by what you do with your gifts, by whether you use your talents to build walls or bridges. And Maria had chosen bridges, every single time.